forth the training session for a workshop for February 17th, 2016. So let's get this underway. We're going to do a roll call on the workshop. So.
Did you want to go to this one or this one?
Oh, God, we have to do that again? Is it once a
I
year?
just did mine. Actually, I did mine
You want me to sign
I didn't
this?
know if we had to
3
do it
weeks
every
ago.
year.
I did my training like 3 weeks, no, like a month ago, 3 weeks
I can
ago.
do that.
Was that for the Sunshine Law training?
Yeah, it was the one that was run by the commissioners and
Oh, what a sleeper.
Seminole County. It was over in the commissioner building, or the
Right. I'm not sure when that was, but it is a requirement to do that annually.
yeah, I did that. I just did it 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
Why are they so boring?
I think so.
It was like
Sorry.
5 hours long.
Yeah,
It
well,
was
this one-
extremely boring.
Well, this one wasn't 5 hours. It
And
wasn't 5
some
hours.
of us really need
We're
to
supposed
attend,
It says it was supposed to be
if you
4
know what
hours.
I mean.
I think we
Hank.
did it.
Hey,
And,
you guys are on the record.
That's okay. Can you do it on mic?
no,
I think we all need a refresher because I learned some
Sessions
things
are like days
last
back
time.
to back.
I didn't learn
Afternoon
anything.
Well,
this
speaking,
I was hoping it wasn't annual.
that's annual.
are we? You all know the recording.
We're live, yes. We're recording.
Okay, well, speaking of refreshers, since we started working on creating a citywide preservation plan, and we've stepped away from that for a little while due to various reasons, and Ian had stated, I guess not the last meeting, but the meeting before that, that his objective for the new year was really to get back into that, which I appreciate it because it's important. One of the things I really see the preservation plan doing for us is being able to really hone in on the whole heritage tourism potential that we have in town, which is going to, I think, eventually become a major economic driver. So having said that, I want to just give like a little recap since we've been absent from it so long. And I also want to recap some other trainings that we have had that tie into preservation, because they're not just specifically about the preservation plan, but about preservation in general, because some of the board members are actually new since I did these trainings and never even have seen the materials. So some of you, you'll have seen some of what I'm going over right now, some of you won't, but let's just start, and if it's all stuff you already know, we could blow through it, but basically, once again, looking at working again on the citywide preservation plan. So we just have what is a preservation plan, and I took this from the District of Columbia and their preservation plan, and their goal is for a plan that provides a vision for the city's historic environment, partnership opportunities, and goals and targets for actions. So, of course, a preservation plan is not going to result in any kind of additional regulation citywide. What it is a framework. And just like this here, for partnership opportunities, once you all have a plan in place, it's going to be easier for you to embark on partnership opportunities. And also the goals and targets for actions, once you have that memorialized in a preservation plan, it's going to be easier to kind of seek out grant opportunities. And for DCs, it says, in timelines and graphics, the plan traces how Washington grew from modest beginnings into a dynamic multicultural city. It also explores ideas about celebrating the upcoming 225th anniversary, which this is a little dated, but I took this from their plan. So one of the things that you will have in the preservation plan is a little bit of history and background on our community. So somebody who picks up the plan who's not familiar with Sanford can actually see there's a little bit of history in there and context. So, which I think is important, because what I get a lot, out there in the world is people saying things like, we want to be like Winter Park. Well, you didn't start like Winter Park and you were never like Winter Park. So why do you want to be like Winter Park now? So the idea is to embrace Sanford's unique sense of history and its authenticity from that, and actually work that into a plan. So you wouldn't want your heritage tourism plan to take a copy of, say, if City of Winter Park had one, which they don't, but say they did, you wouldn't want to take theirs and just say, okay, we're going to implement this in Sanford. It won't work, because totally different communities, totally different dynamics. So like I just was talking about heritage tourism, And this is from our economic impacts of preservation in Florida. This is the older one from January '05. They've updated it, and they're getting ready to update it again. But what it says from this document is tourism is a vital component of Florida's economy as one of the state's top 3 revenue producers. Heritage tourism, one of the top reasons for pleasure travel, has become increasingly important for both travelers and the communities they visit and offers significant benefits to the community. Heritage tourism can offset the cost of maintaining historic sites, help stimulate preservation efforts, and perpetuate the sense of place that lends communities their unique character and identity. And a sense of place is really important as we go on, down the road that we're on, which I think that we're on an excellent path right now. Really keeping in mind Sanford's unique sense of place is important because that needs to be honored and respected in things like the Catalyst redevelopment site. So rather than a developer coming in and taking a concept that was worked in Houston, and now they're going to take that concept and drop it, drop the box down here in our downtown, that wouldn't honor our sense of place. But doing something that's a context sensitive, looks at our history and all of that, and that's another reason why it is important to do a preservation plan, because although it's not going to result in regulations, it does provide a framework for new development, even infill development. So and just these were some numbers. These are kind of dated numbers, but heritage tourism impacts in Florida: 75,528 jobs, 1.57 billion in income, 2.46 billion in gross state product, 813 million in total taxes, state and local, and is 322, and federal is 492, and 2.21 billion in state wealth. And what is the city doing to capture some of this revenue? I guess I have some slides out of place here. We've already done some things. We've been working toward this for a while. So we've got the citywide wayfinding system. Obviously, that's geared toward travelers from outside of our community, because if you're from here, you don't need direction to all these places. We've got the downtown kiosk with the QR codes. Of course, the new, well, it's not new anymore, but the city website has been working, and we're actually, that's another thing, if I forget as I go on in this presentation, is something that I wanted to put it out to the board members is to actually get on the city's website, specifically the historic preservation pages. I want you all to look at that as your pages. You are the Historic Preservation Board, because I'm getting ready to undertake a bunch of changes to those pages. So I'd like for you to look at them and see what you think looks good, what you think should be changed. If you have other cities' websites that you really like, and you like how they've approached something there, send me links, because I'm working on this in about the next month or so to totally update and revamp all of those pages, anything to do with historic preservation. Of course, we've got the Pathways to History with the 8 themed walking driving tour brochures. We've got 2 of those brochures printed so far, and we're working on getting the additional brochures finalized and printed. We've got the Sanford Avenue Heritage markers, Riverwalk informational markers, Veterans Memorial Park information markers. Those are all part of heritage tourism. Those are things when visitors come here, they're drawn to, they're interested in the history and all of that. That gives them an opportunity to read it while they're out in the environment. So a preservation plan can include a plan for more of those and actually delineate areas where they could potentially go. Another thing that a preservation plan should look at is design standards. In the case of a citywide preservation plan, you're not going to have prescribed design standards that have to be adhered to. They would be more like design standards that are suggestions if you're outside the historic district. So when you think about this, and also the Catalyst site and any infill development in the downtown, what kinds of things work in design? So I have a little list here: vibrant street life and pedestrian activity. If you have a design that's impacting the street life and the pedestrian activity, that doesn't work. So anything where new curb cuts are introduced, that's an impact, because once you start having driveways and it starts becoming more about the vehicle and less about the person, that's actually an adverse impact. Active natural elements, I have here fire, water, music, art, warm ambiance. So when you think about a street scene, I think about Delray Beach. I was in Delray Beach. I've been there several times and I love it, but I just remember walking down the street in Delray Beach. It was kind of cold out. A lot of the restaurants had like the heaters, the gas heaters, so you had a little bit of warmth and kind of the look of them because you could see the flame, and really great signage going down that street. The sidewalk cafes were beautiful. They obviously have some design standards on the sidewalk cafe. A lot of natural materials, brick, stone, etc. Like I said, good signage. So what can HPB do? Well, we're already doing a lot of things, maybe not necessarily HPB with the sidewalk cafes, though that was an effort that was led by HPB. But, 10 years ago when I first came on board with the city, we didn't have, or we just had them like that year, sidewalk cafes. They weren't even allowed before that. So, we've come a long way. I mean, our sidewalks are being actively used now. The streetscapes are working. These sidewalk cafes, I try to sell them on business owners all the time because business owners come in, the first thing they want when they get their, business license and they're ready to open is they want their signage. And they make such a big deal of their signage. And I tell them the $150 for your sidewalk cafe is going to be the best advertising that you could do, because that's the visibility right there. People sitting at the sidewalk cafe using the sidewalk, that kind of vibrancy is what attracts people. It's not some huge sign, because that's usually people think the bigger the sign, the more people I'm going to attract. It doesn't work that way. And anything also that's going to impact, again, sense of place. So a huge sign, in their mind is going to help a lot to drive traffic to their business, when in reality that's kind of conflicting with what we have out there. And so it's jarring. It's not attractive. It's actually kind of puts people off because they want to come here because it's authentic. It has a certain feel. So a lot of it's education too. So think about your preservation plan as being an educational piece, because it's really a marketing piece is what it winds up being.
Christine, quick question. On the sidewalk cafes, are there guidelines? Are there?
Yes.
There are? Mm-hmm. Really? Okay.
Yeah, and I know where you're going with this. I
Yeah.
can see like the wheels turning. You're thinking, if there are guidelines, why do some sidewalk cafes look the way they look?
Correct.
Right. There's a couple of things. What happens over time is sometimes people get their approvals and then things start creeping in and they don't get approval for that. So they have approval for their sidewalk cafe, but then they add stuff.
Okay.
That's a code violation. So
Okay.
we periodically, I work with Monica, and she has to go out there and look at all the approvals and actually walk the street and see if anything's creeped into their sidewalk cafe that they're not allowed to have. If
Okay.
they add anything to their sidewalk cafe, they're supposed to amend their permit. So we're supposed to know everything that's out there. I myself, walking down the street last week, noticed some plastic chain and PVC
That's
pipe.
exactly what I was
Yeah.
talking about, because it should be attractive. I mean, that doesn't make me want to go sit there.
No, not allowed. It's a code violation,
Okay.
so we just have to follow up on that. I noted that one too.
Okay.
Yes.
What about the people standing out waving the signs?
That cannot be regulated.
All right, but what if the sign guy didn't show up, so they just put the big sign up against the back of their pickup, so when people drove into town, they saw the big sign?
That's a code violation.
Okay. Barber shop on the corner next to Corner Cafe. And then what if they decide to bring their big Suburban in with the trailer behind it with the advertisement, and it's parked in front of the business? Is that a code violation? Along with the golf cart that has the advertisement on it too. So all that's parked in front of the business.
Code violation.
Okay.
So these are things under when we have the code enforcement section to bring up, because then that
Okay.
gets forwarded to code enforcement. But, code enforcement does have the ability to do citations, like on the spot. And it's in the ordinance, they're allowed to do that, but they haven't really used that so much as a tool. as maybe they can, and that may be something that HPB wants to bring up collectively as a board. You know, you may want to ask the question, where we have this ability to do citations, why are we not doing that? So if that's something that you all want to bring up, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea.
Would this be the time or later on to bring up maybe something HPB could recommend to the building department and code enforcement? Stop work means stop work?
I would bring that up under the chairman and board items for discussion,
Okay.
and we
I
could
will
talk
do
about it
that.
then. I forgot to make copies for the board, but do you have your copy, Cheryl? So I can read that later. I don't remember if I read that at the last meeting. Have you all, did you see a copy of that yet? The stop work order information from other communities?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to borrow that from you. Under board and chairman items for discussion, we'll talk about that.
I would say really the only ones that seem to have have resolved this issue is Lake Worth, because the others are still doing what we're doing. But Lake Worth seems to have a really good solution. So,
And that's something, too, we have to talk to the city attorney about, because once you start getting police involved to escort people off the site, it's a whole other thing. I mean, that has to be kind of really supported by the commissioners and the city in general. So it's not really an HPB decision, that's more like a city commission directive.
but they did cite different codes in the Florida codes that would apply to that. So.
One of the things as we go forward working on the preservation plan that I think is important is for board members to send me things. I mean, this is your plan. I don't want it to be a plan where it's Christina's ideas and I feed them to you and then you just agree with them. So it's, you know, all of you like historic preservation. That's why you're up here. You visit other communities. You see things in other communities that you might want to see in Sanford. So that's something that I need from you all is whenever you see something and you are somewhere that, you know, this is something that would just be great in Sanford, you know, we need to follow up on it. Let me know what it is. Send me a link to a website. Take photographs. So whatever you can do to push that information my way, because then I can actually research it and see where and how it might fit into a master plan like this. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think that is going to be important, and it's a good reason we're working on a framework for a preservation plan, is as new development comes in citywide, but especially in the downtown, we want to have good examples of new development. So we don't want to get to the point where you're trying to convey your ideas of what good design is and you're verbally trying to describe it, because design is, it's visual, you have to see it. So if you're in another community and you see a building that you know is a new building and you think it was done really well, take a photo of it, send that to me. Likewise, if you're in a community and you see new development in a historic district that you think is really bad, I want to see those examples too. So, because again, like city commission, planning and zoning commission, they may not be as aesthetically inclined as maybe this board is. So sometimes when you have those examples right in front of them, that's helpful. And also anything that you see as best practices from other communities, let me know. And I'm always looking at that kind of thing. I have a folder on our server right now where whenever I go to another community, if I see something that I think is really good, I save the photograph and I put it in that folder. So I have a little library going right now, but you know, you all go different places that I've never been. So that would be good to have from you all. Here's an example. This is pretty decent infill. I mean, it's new construction. This is in Baldwin Park, but you know, there's articulation. It's a modern building, but there's a nod to traditional materials and, you know, the arches and the cornice at the roof line, and you know, it's not just a flat wall.
Right.
This was an example of signage in Delray Beach that I talked about before. I think that they had really good signage in Delray. For example, you know, right now we don't really allow neon signs, but this is, I think, no one here would debate this as being a sign, would you all? So it's one of those things where if we, we've had in the past, and all of you have sat up here, where it's like you look at something and you're like, ugh, I really don't like it, but Schedule S doesn't prohibit it, right? So if you have design guidelines and you have examples like this that you could direct people to, then that makes that a little bit easier to say, well, this is what we're looking for. This is the feel of what we're looking for. I think the reason, just, from my professional opinion, why this particular sign works is it's on a brick background. It's not internally illuminated, or it's not a box that has the neon mounted to
Right.
it. That's actually wired through the building. So you have this traditional material in the background, and it's a nice offset.
Accentuating that.
Yeah,
building
it's-
instead of,
Yeah,
Right.
and it complements it.
Yeah.
So examples like that are what I'm talking about. They have a lot of open air over there, which I think is great, because anytime, you could use that. We've got a restaurant in downtown that's going to be opening soon that has that concept. That's Fuel, which is going to be the new barbecue place on the corner of 2nd and Park. So they'll be utilizing the open air concept. Sidewalk cafes, obviously. Key to a downtown success, I think. The barriers here for the sidewalk cafe are not bad. And these are not very expensive barriers. These are kind of the same barriers you would see in movie theater queue. It's a folding wall. Signage.
This is Delray?
No, this one is
Oh, so
Prado
that's
and
Winter
Würzburg.
Park.
Yeah, I have just all different examples. So having these examples, here's another. This is an infill new construction. I think it's great. I could see this building here in downtown. That wouldn't be an adverse impact. That'd actually be nice. Different materials, the doors and windows, the proportion of them, the scale of everything. You see it's not just a flat wall, but they have the banding of the brick horizontally articulated. Then they have this stonework and, the window openings. They've got some curve here. It's really an attractive building. The archways, it's kind of a historic style. This is all new construction here.
Love that.
Yeah, see, I think something like this would work in the downtown. This, new construction. So, they have the outdoor area, but it's open. The balconies, they're not projecting too deep, In an urban area, that's the thing, a lot of times people want balconies, but you're not going to do balconies like you would on a condo or an apartment complex, large balconies. I mean, just enough space to get out there. But I think these are very attractive. They're not that obtrusive. They provide a little bit of articulation to the building. These nice metal beams here.
Baldwin Park has a lot of those shorter style.
Yeah.
Little shorter style. We lived in one, the townhouses on Jake Street, so that was about that size.
Yeah, it's more.
You
It's
can
just
get
more
a chair on it and a small little table.
Right.
That's about it.
And that's all you really need, though. And, that fits. The scale and massing of it fits for an urban environment. And that's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with an urban environment
That's nice.
in here.
Yeah.
Brick. Because imagine if, we had a proposal like downtown Orlando when they had the big theater come in and they took out that entire city block, the Woolworth block. Yeah, I think something like this would have been a lot nicer of a replacement than what they did.
Yeah.
But they did something that you would see like at City Walk, in my opinion. I really don't care for what
What do
they
you
did.
think of that sign?
That sign? The cinema sign?
That backlit?
That doesn't look like it's backlit. That just looks like aluminum with neon right here.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you mean in the box?
Well, no, that's obviously backlit. That's got to be backlit. I'm talking about the cinema. That could be backlit.
That by these points here, that looks like it's neon.
Yeah. That's,
See, because
yeah.
each of the points right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure that's neon. And that's one of the things with everything that's been happening is Mr. Bonaparte sent an email out to Russ and he asked, what changes do we need to make to Schedule S right now? Well, really don't want to open up the code personally. I don't feel like there's anything that's not working that needs to be changed.
Why would he send an email like that? There is nothing that needs to be changed.
Well,
That's the board's
That's
opinion,
the
but
board's
that may not be
opinion.
others' opinion.
What was that?
New development.
people in town may not agree with that.
Right.
That's their prerogative. We
No, you
talked
can't
about
fix
changing the garage doors,
Right.
something like that.
Yeah.
Why can't it be limited? Why does it have to be, is there a way of opening it up for just specific things? Why do you have to open up the whole works?
Well, that's what you're on exactly the track that I was just going in is, Mr. Bonaparte brought that up, and I'm really hesitant to do that, to open up the whole code, because the board, and Hank was part of this, and who else was on the board at the time when
Robert
we were
Kenny.
making the changes?
Robert Kenny?
Robert Kenny, and were
Steve
you on the
Jesper.
board, Cheryl? You were. So, we worked hard on that. That was work session after work session, line by line, page by page for the code. And I don't feel like enough time has passed that we really need to revisit that, because we were so exhaustive about it. But the one section that I think we might want to look at is signs.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot that signs can do for a district, and I think our sign regulations are, and that's why I was a proponent of, before the fee schedule, anything that was commercial was a $200 application fee. But if you remember, I advocated, let's at least for the sign portion, drop it down to $25. And that way business owners don't feel like, oh gosh, it's this huge investment just to even ask. So $25, pretty much they can ask for
Anything.
whatever, because HPB has the purview to review and approve additional outside of what's in Schedule S. But, so I think if any section were to get opened up, I think signage would be the place to go.
So you could do sections. You don't have to open up the whole
Well,
thing.
that's what she doesn't know.
Well,
Here-
last
here-
year Lonnie said we would have to, because we were talking about opening up to revise the garage door one, and they cautioned us against it, because he said if you open up a little bit, you have to open the whole thing, and then
but
public
that's
meetings.
That's
and
his opinion. I mean,
But-
I like to get it, I don't see why.
That's the
you
attorney's
can't-
I mean, that's his opinion, yeah.
The attorney.
Well, it's an ordinance, so if we open any section of it, it gives the city commission the right to look at the
change,
entire
right.
ordinance.
Not
So
necessarily.
it would put it all at risk.
Yeah, it's not necessarily that they would, but they would have the opportunity to do
Well-
whatever they wanted once it's open.
Yeah, well, that means
Discuss
you
it,
guys would never want to discuss S code. You're afraid what the commissioners might do. Can't the commissioners open up an ordinance on their own?
They can.
Well, so they're not in any rush to do that.
I could just,
I know, but you can't never change the S codes because you're afraid of what the commissioners might do.
It might be wise to wait until the climate change was, taking that under consideration.
Well, I'm not saying tomorrow, I'm just
Right.
It also would help going in with a plan,
well,
knowing
That's a very
exactly
good
what
point.
we want to talk about, and proposing it in a way where, let's be honest, and this is on tape. There's only a certain amount of time that anybody wants to spend in a commission meeting. They don't want to spend 8 hours, 10 hours. So if we go in with a plan that discusses the certain parts that we want to discuss, we may be able to get it open, discussed, and closed in the matter of time that it takes to discuss it. So going in arbitrarily and just saying, hey, we want to review it, that's going to leave a lot of, so I think if we come in and say, we want to talk about this section, and this section, specifically this one, and this one, we're going to allot ourselves enough time that maybe once it's done, it's done.
Hopefully.
So hopefully, well, but it'll give us our best opportunity, our best, I guess, hope that that's what we can limit it to that.
You don't have to come back for quite a while.
No.
Yeah, and this is what I did a panel discussion in Winter Park before they were updating their preservation ordinance and all of that talk about, preservation ordinances. And some people think, okay, the ordinance is in place and it never changes. Well, our ordinance for the city of Sanford was only 7 pages long when we first had our first historic districts. 72 pages long now.
Wow.
So if a preservation ordinance is working, it will be updated periodically, and usually that's maybe every 10 years. Some municipalities don't even do it that frequently, but if it's working, you want to strengthen it as time goes by, because you're upping the bar. If you have an area, regionally, let me just throw this out. College Park is not a historic district, right? Do you all see what's happening in College Park? Do you drive through and just see? It's shocking. I mean,
It is.
every time I'm in College Park, there's another old building that's gone,
Yeah,
and
it's
some
awful.
to the lot line, glass,
Yeah.
modern, huge. I mean, Winter Park has this where they're tearing down houses and building McMansions, but at least the architectural style of them is still kind of context sensitive to Winter Park. Like, you go there and you know this is kind of a Winter Park style. But in College Park, it's just like a thing that landed on the lot. It's crazy what's happening. They don't have a historic district. So imagine if College Park decided, okay, we've had enough, we want to create a historic district. We're going to go to Sanford and just take their ordinance. How do you think that's going to fly? Not at all. Because you can't take an area that's never had these regulations and then go ahead and impose municipalities' regulations when they've been in place for 30 years. It doesn't work. So you really need to start at a certain point and then grow it as buildings are rehabbed and people start getting it more, and property owners are attracted to the place because it's historic. So initially, when you have historic districts that are created, a lot of times the people who live there, there's a group of people who are pushing back against it. They don't want it. So, eventually you reach this point where people are actually moving there because they want it. So, and we see that here in our historic districts is, realtors tell me all the time, if it's a couple of blocks outside the district, people don't want it. So, people want to live here because we have these regulations, because we have the historic districts. So, but it doesn't just happen like that overnight. That has to be grown into.
My sister and brother-in-law are a perfect example. They're looking to invest in Sanford right now. And that is the first question they ask Maria when she tells them about a house. Is it in the district?
Yeah.
Because they don't want to live outside that. And what attracts them to that is the regulations. Because then there's control of what's happening around them. And I just think it's education. I think it's just educating people that it's a plus, not a minus.
And that's, again, your preservation plan is going to be a big educational tool for people. I have the maps here. I brought them down to pass out to you all again. And good Hank's here because I think he wasn't here when we went over this one. But, we have the potential here for so many more historic districts than we have. And so how you want to create that is the board doesn't just want to come in and say, we want to make this historic district, Sanford Heights Historic District. That doesn't work. You want the people from that area to actually kind of submit to the board, we want to be a historic district. But what does work, because there's usually no pushback to it, is National Register designation. So there's no reason why we couldn't create additional National Register districts if they're approved. And what happens there is then people say, I'm in a National Register historic district and my neighbor down the street is doing X, Y, Z. Why is the city letting them do that? Well, then that's the city's opportunity to say, we can't regulate it. National Register has no regulations on private property rights. The whole point of the National Register is to make sure that the government doesn't impact your historic property, not the other way around. It's the local level that has the protection. So it's an opportunity to start getting historic districts so you can start, having really defined areas and promoting the history of those areas, and then getting the property owners to, it's that sense of pride that comes with it. Wow, I'm in a historic district. That means my area is important. Where my home is important. And then they start really getting it and wanting to protect that. And then that's when, and that's the way it should happen. As much of a preservationist as I am not an advocate of creating districts that are like imposed by local government, because I don't think it works. I really don't. I think it just needs to happen the other way.
But we talked about this before, and we realized that it takes, 15% of the property owners
Right.
to approve a Schedule S environment, right?
Well,
So-
a historic
so
district.
yeah.
So yeah, they can. They would petition the city to create a historic district. So, say using Sanford Heights again, just because I used it as the first example. They want to get together and create a historic district. They get X amount of signatures. Then that could be brought to HPB. HPB reviews it. We could do survey and inventory and then pass that along to City Commission. That would be for local district. Now, for the National Register districts, that's an effort that this board can lead.
Right.
So, and we talked about that when we did this exercise here, because I sent that grant app to the state, which unfortunately I ranked 7th and they only funded like the first 4 projects. So I'm applying again this year. But that's to show, we're looking at this additional National Register districts. We could get our survey and inventory done. And that survey and inventory is important because when we had our residential and commercial district done, like in the late 70s and then the 80s, the commercial district was the late 70s and the residential was in the 80s, I still use those documents today. I refer to them all the time. I look at the old photographs, I look at the notes and all of that. That helps with preservation projects now. And one of the things that I would love to have done, but I don't have a budget for this, but I would love to have a financial, like an economic impact of preservation on a local level done.
Yeah.
That would be something where economic development would fund a study, because I'm sure that if you compare it with the rest of the city, that it's going to be leaps and bounds as percentage-wise above.
I was actually just, when you started this conversation, I was thinking in my mind if there was any studies out there that went and defined as far as even property values, how, when property values swing up and down, how do property values that are outside of a historic district compare to a historic district? Does the historic district, does it swing less, in a downturn? Is the swing faster in an upturn? I mean, are there any impacts as far as a historic district as far as property values and their rate of incline or decline? So I'd be curious if there's any studies like that.
And there are. Donovan Ripkema he's an economist, and his specialty is historic preservation. He's known internationally. He's very, very well versed on the topic, but he's done these studies. The name of his company is Place Economics. And time and again, his studies prove, and he works with the universities, he works all over the country. It proves exactly what you're saying, that the values in historic districts pretty much retain, and they don't dip as far, they tend to go higher and all of that. So he's got it for different communities, and he'd be somebody to hire, actually, but I don't know that the city can afford him. He'd be a really good one because he's done this in so many other communities, knows what to look at.
Yeah.
There were other historic districts in the city. They could each one of those districts could have their own set of rules, right?
Right.
They have their own S codes. So they could be less stringent on some of them, that's what they wanted.
Exactly, and we also talked about the concept of some being National Register districts, but at the local level being conservation districts.
Yeah.
So, for example, take Georgetown and Goldsboro. If Georgetown and Goldsboro became National Register districts, at the local level, instead of being historic districts, they would be conservation districts, and the regulations would just be limited to new construction.
Yeah, that's good.
So
That's a start.
then you don't
That's a
have the
great place to
pushback
start, yeah.
of, these. Well,
I like that.
But if you put it on new construction,
Nobody cares.
right. So in that, then it would be design standards that
Yeah.
come along with it and all of that. So
Is that something us as a board can push?
Absolutely.
Or do the citizens have to do it?
We can do it.
the board can. And that's
Sorry.
what
Citizens still have to sign off on it, or they should.
for a conservation district.
I mean,
Yeah.
it'd be good to have them on board.
Right.
Obviously, they don't want to do it, but we want to
Yeah.
do it. That's not going to look good. So you'd have to educate them.
Yeah, we'd have
Oh.
public meetings, public
Yeah.
hearings, all of that. But
And I know this is outside of our purview, but I think it looks. The more I hear, we talk about this stuff, I see it as a project that the trust actually can get, because being an organization and having dues and things like that, you can increase your base by the more historic districts that there are, the more potential members, the more widespread. So it looks, definitely something that outside organizations can work with HPB and to further that. Because obviously we as HPB members couldn't, as a group, go and petition a neighborhood,
We could talk to them.
but the trust could. You know what I'm saying? As an outside, you know what I'm saying? So it's not where we would officially go, and because we're not really in the.
But we just agreed that we should advocate it.
No, of course, but we're not going to go knock on door to door. And,
I would.
you know, as a group. I'm saying as a group, we're not.
No,
you
you're
know,
not going to do
but-
it as a group.
Right, but you know,
Right.
sure.
Go out there and collect some signatures,
Sure, yeah.
clipboard.
No,
Y'all
but-
know, all y'all have seen me out doing it, knocking on doors.
No, I think that. But see, I think that's a trust. That's
yeah,
that's
well,
a
I
project
agree.
the trust could do
Yeah.
in cooperation with HPB and to
Be a joint
recruit that.
effort.
So yeah.
I think it's a good idea.
So-
And when we get further along with the plan and we actually have like a draft put together, that would be something good where we can actually maybe do a trust meeting, reach out to Nelson or whoever and say, you know, let's do a meeting where HPB is inviting, which this is a sidebar from what we're talking about right now. I'm working on the lecture series for this year, and we're actually looking at the June lecture to, of course, do it with the trust, but over at CCS. So doing like the one night where it's the lecture kind of part, and then the next night actually hands-on workshop. So actually, you know, working with the resources and seeing what they have at the shop, and because I'm getting a lot of requests for hands-on, a lot. I mean, every time I turn around and ask, what do you think would be a good lecture? Oh, do something hands-on. I mean, it's so constant now that it's so that's what we're
gonna have
doing
to
in
do it.
June. But that's also interesting that I wanted to note is, you know, all this time that I've been with the city, but even beyond, I stay pretty active in historic preservation, obviously, on a statewide level and all of that. And even the trainings that we've had have been, for the most part, really kind of academically and regulation focused. But what's happening is there's this whole generation of new people coming into preservation, and there's also a look at the recent past. So, you know, mid-century modern buildings, and there's this whole shift going on in preservation, which is focused on, you know, new people coming in, the mid-century recent past resources, and then also diversity in historic preservation. And this thing is just changing the direction of like the national movement, like on a national level, if you look at the movement. And it goes through cycles. Like in the 70s, it was all about, you know, the bicentennial of the country and, you know, the houses of the presidents. And, you know, then from there in like the 80s, it was more about historic districts, like locally designated neighborhoods. So it went from, you know, these important homes to actually collectively looking at neighborhoods. That was like 80s and 90s trend. And now it's trending in this direction. And so I'm seeing so much more of this. We want to actually get in there, roll up our sleeves, get our hands dirty, and learn it. And just in this past month, 3 different people in town have approached me and said, we're starting preservation businesses. So,
Wow.
you know, we do woodworking, this, that, and, you know, we think this is the way to go. This is 3 completely separate individuals that don't even know each other.
Yeah.
And they're going down the road of, like, we're going to do this full time, which
Wow.
I think is really interesting to see that shift.
I'm telling you.
So-
Opportunities, you know.
What was that?
I was just, she's
I-
saying myself and her husband need to get on that just with
Yeah.
The woodworkers.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll tell you what, I don't know. I think I sent you all the info. The Historic Homes Workshop in Tampa this weekend.
If you did, I wouldn't be making it to Tampa, though, unfortunately.
It's a hands-on workshop that they're doing in Tampa this weekend, and one of them is starting your own preservation business.
No.
And anyway, it's going to be pretty good. But okay, so back onto this. I know we got a little bit sidetracked, but I was just talking about design standards. You know, I showed you some of the images of
You
good
like
infill.
putting suburban development in downtown backwards, or?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
suburban development in downtown is backwards thinking. It adversely impacts the pedestrian character of the community, thereby impacting the health and economy of the community. The focus of revitalization in many cities is to reverse the damaging effects of suburban development and sprawl. So I think that's important to think about because a lot of what we have, and you'll see it on the maps, is, you know, we have historic resources, and in some areas, then we have like vacant lots that could be infilled on. What you don't want to have is like have a suburban model home that belongs in some cookie cutter subdivision, like plucked down on a lot, because that changes the whole character of the community. Think about if you were walking down the street in a district and you had, front porch, front porch, front porch, and then you had 3 houses in a row that were front-loaded garages. Front-loaded garages with the entries pushed back, and, how would that feel? I mean, that totally disconnects the whole feel of, and in the downtown, too. I mean, imagine if you were walking down the street in downtown and all of a sudden there's like a Taco Bell drive-thru. How does that feel for the downtown?
Yeah.
So, and it's not like historic districts don't allow fast food places, but the design has to be a certain way.
And I could go for Taco Bell downtown. I mean, don't get me
Depends on
wrong.
how many drinks the Imperial.
Exactly. What time of night are we talking?
The other thing I wanted to talk about, and before I get into this, I wanted to say something that I saw that I thought was so awesome that would be neat if we had a preservation plan to develop something like this, and this was in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, once the steel mills closed and all that population left, I mean, it was kind of like Detroit, where you had all these vacant buildings, and they became dilapidated. I mean, in Pittsburgh, if you were in a historic district, and this was about, because I was considering a move to Pittsburgh like 6 years ago. You can walk in, they had a very young mayor, he was like 30 years old, and he was pro-development. So in his eyes, pro-development was anti-preservation. So if you walked in to the building department, it didn't matter what building you had. If it wasn't in a historic district, it could have been the most amazing architectural gem. If you weren't in a historic district, no questions asked, you got an over-the-counter demolition permit. No questions asked. So there was large-scale demolition all over Pittsburgh outside of the historic districts. But his thing was, we got to tear down these buildings to let new development come. But when you have that with no plan, like Detroit was doing that initially without a plan, and then they realized what they were losing, and now it's like, okay, let's allow demo of this section, keep all the buildings in this section and rehab them. So now they're kind of getting, but I mean, that's just crazy because as we know, if you tear it down, that doesn't necessarily mean development's going to come. We have stuff that was torn down here in the 50s and 60s, and we're still waiting. So that doesn't, But what they had in Pittsburgh is there was a nonprofit group that had put together this program where they got architects and engineers who cared about historic preservation and cared about the city's buildings to actually do pro bono work on the historic buildings, and they had like a design collective. So if you were a property owner that had a historic building and you wanted to do a rehab of your building, but you didn't really know like what the building looked like before, say the storefront was altered, they would actually do free design services, which, do drawings of like, here's what your storefront would look like and all of that. They wouldn't do your full construction drawings, but like renderings and all of that. And they went out into the city and they did this in certain areas where, this is what it looks like now, but through these renderings, this is what it could look like. And people started realizing, wow, we didn't, that's what's actually there. They were looking at the buildings like awful signage, awful alterations that happened like in the 60s and 70s. But if you have some creative types, whether, it doesn't have to be an architect or an engineer, it could be a designer who's good with drawing. If you can convey that, then sometimes that helps people to realize what their preservation project could look like. So that was something that they offered that was actually outside of the districts too, because it was supposed to entice people to want to do preservation on their own. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But if we had a preservation plan and we had certain sections of the plan that related to, design, for example, and people could see it, you could show it to them through images and all of that, that's a lot more helpful than what we have now, which is just Schedule S and hand somebody Schedule S and tell them to, they just look at it and they're immediately intimidated, and, so the next thing I wanted to recap on was materials and methods. Some of you know how strongly I feel about historic materials and methods. There's a number of reasons why. Usually what I talk about quite a bit is the strength of the historic materials, what kind of methods were used that complemented those materials. And I'm just going to read this. Sometimes attempts at preservation result in damage and loss of historic fabric due to lack of knowledge and understanding of building materials and methods. Understanding building materials and methods will aid property owners in their rehabilitation projects, ensuring the longevity of important historic resources. And then I have some links here, and I'll be happy to email this to you. Building envelope, do you all know what the building envelope is? Okay, so think of your building as a box, okay? Your building envelope is that box. So that whole top, sides, all of that, that's your building envelope. And so your building envelope consists of your roof, your windows, your doors. So you want to have a sound building envelope first before you embark on a preservation project. So you don't want to go doing a kitchen rehab when you have a leaky roof. So the most important is to look at the building envelope first, look at the materials and methods used in the building envelope, and start critically assessing what's happening. And I'm just going to throw some examples at you. So, sometimes I'm sitting upstairs, somebody comes in and they want to talk about their old house. And, we want to rip out all of our original windows. They're leaky. We want to get double insulated glass windows. And when you ask them why, energy efficiency, I want to save on my energy bill. And then you learn more about, and I've had this more than once. So they're bringing in a whole project. They're redoing their whole building. And then the very next thing they say to you is, I want to put these architectural black shingles on my roof. Okay, so you want to rip out all your windows and doors, but you want to put black shingles on your roof. So 30% of the energy loss on the building is through your roof, approximately. Only 8% is through your windows and doors. So it doesn't make sense to go ahead and, go ahead and do black shingles and rip out all your windows to put energy efficient windows when it doesn't make sense. The other thing is, a lot of people are with this energy efficiency. We're in Florida. The buildings are on pure foundations. They were meant to breathe. So people want to seal up, blown insulation or, all of this in their building, and they're not letting it breathe. And I have an example of a property on 5th, because we didn't have anything that prohibited this. And at the time I said, I don't recommend you doing this on the whole building, but they want it in the roof. They want it in the walls, and they want it in the floor. What's happening is the building's not able to breathe.
Blown insulation.
Not the cellulose insulation, but the foam insulation. So what they did it on the underside. So in between all their joists, they blew that in. Well, what's happening now is all their original floors that have been there 100 years are all buckling. Because moisture has gotten inside. We live in Florida. It's a humid climate. Moisture is always going to find its way in. So the important thing is when moisture finds its way in, it can find its way back out. In this case, because they sealed all that up on the bottom, their floors are rotting. So inside, their living room and dining room, the floors are just buckling. And once you put that stuff, that foam, you can't get it off. It's
never get it off.
Very, very tough stuff to deal with. So you have to think about that. A lot of people, I'm going to get this old building and I'm going to do this. And another example is painting projects. Somebody sands all their siding and, what do they want to do? They want to caulk all the joints, right? Well, you don't want to caulk the horizontal joints because, again, if moisture gets in, you want it to be able to get out. You only want to caulk the vertical joints. But 9 times out of 10, when you go out there and you look at somebody's rehab project, they're doing every single bit of it. And, because I don't want to have to come back and do this again. But, what if you have a roof leak? All these things can happen. You want the building to be able to breathe. If your windows are sitting in their frame properly and they've been rehabbed properly, and you have around the voids around the window, where your trim covers that, you can do some can blown in and that area, you're going to greatly decrease any energy loss that you have in your windows. So the double pane and all of that, but people think they're doing the right thing. So that's the whole unintended consequences. Another example is brick. So I was at the jail building week before last because, the people who are buying it are getting ready. They're going to close in March, and they wanted to do a walkthrough and look at it. And so they had submitted some preliminary drawings to me, which called for blasting the brick and putting a sealer on it. Do you know why we wouldn't want to do that?
It needs to breathe. The brick.
But what else, first of all, what does blasting of the brick do?
It's going to
Removes the
deteriorate.
face, removes
Yeah.
a lot of the face
Blow it
of the
up.
brick.
Yeah, so if you think about the way a brick is made, it's, you know, sand, clay, whatever, formed,
It's
packed
integrated.
in a mold, then it's fired, it's baked. And so that hard outer surface, that baked surface it's like our skin. That's what's providing the protection. Once you breach that baked surface, as I'm calling it, you don't have any protection. So if water hits it, it's just going to start rotting. And so what happens is people want to blast it most oftentimes to get rid of paint. Oh, I want the beautiful original brick to show, so I'm going to blast it. It takes off all the paint, and the reason why it took off the paint is because it took the outer layer of the brick off. And then on top of it, you're sealing it, so now if moisture does get in, which it will,
See one in there.
it basically rots the brick from the inside out. So there were, and this happens from other reasons. Like you may have brick where there was a gutter there and the water's just been on the brick so long over time that it eroded that face, and you could just touch the brick and it just powders out.
Yeah.
But Christine, you can use dry ice, blast it with dry ice. It doesn't affect the
That's how
glaze.
Andy got out of Shawshank.
Yeah, the verdict is still out on that.
Well, I mean, you have to use it properly,
Yeah.
but it's,
Oh, I always say once the brick's been painted, just err on the side of caution. Faux paint it.
don't or do.
Faux painted.
Faux painted. Because you can have a professional painter come out and they usually, when they're faux painting, they'll do a base coat, then they'll do a pass with another coat, and they use glazes. They don't use regular paint, they use glazes, so it gives it that authentic look, and then in the end, they'll do like a mortar joint on it.
Yeah.
If you have somebody who knows what they're doing, you would not know that it's not the original brick, because they use a certain kind of paint, like more like a flat paint, that's going to give you that, not a shiny paint.
Right.
So once you've gotten to the point, you want to paint it with not an elastomeric paint, but a breathable paint, and faux paint it. That's going to be better than taking the chance on any of these other treatment options.
So what are they going to do?
Oh, over at the
Yeah.
jail building, we're looking at different options there, because on one wall, the inside wall, there's an old advertising mural because it used to be an exterior wall. And I told them, I said, I bet if you take a push broom to that wall and some kind of brushes, a lot of that's going to knock down, because there has been some water intrusion in the building that's been on that paint that actually helped that paint to bubble up. So rather than chance that it got inside to the brick and start messing with the face of the brick, to just brush it off as much as they can. And there are certain sealers that you can do, but you have to be real careful with the sealers, because again, if you put a sealer on the building, now it's trapping the moisture inside. So
So they want to get rid of that?
no, they're going to
Oh,
keep it. Yeah.
'cause it's beautiful. That's beautiful.
But it's, you know, when I was out, and there's a back area that's kind of like a courtyard
Yeah.
that's been exposed and opened, and you can put your hands on it, and the brick is just powdering out there. Powder. I mean,
Really?
just straight, like chalk. Yeah.
that little courtyard area.
Yeah, in some areas, because it's
Wow.
just had water, you
Yeah.
know, over time. The other thing about brick, and it won't beat brick to death, but is mortar joints. Sometimes when people are doing a repointing project, because, you know, the mortar joints are gone, they think, okay, this is going to be really expensive. I don't want to have to repoint again. So I'm going to use the strongest mortar that I could find, because I don't want to have to do this again. Why is that bad?
Well, I would think that would deteriorate the brick. If that's stronger than the brick.
Right.
So
So
stiff edges.
The mortar is actually designed to be the sacrificial piece. So if everything's working over time, your mortar will deteriorate, because what it is when moisture gets into the brick, it weeps out through the mortar joints. If you create mortar joints, like out of Portland cement, for example, and it's too strong, you'll have the mortar joints forever.
Divert it,
The
yeah.
brick will
brick
have
will-
nowhere to release the water to, and then the brick starts rotting from the inside out. And you especially see this up north with freeze-thaw cycles, where, you know, it freezes and the whole face of the brick and half of the brick will pop right off. So you'll have this perfectly intact mortar joint. Like, you could have a whole wall of like perfectly intact mortar joints and no brick in between them.
You know, in Charleston, we saw some of that happening,
Yeah.
where the brick is, because their mortar, whoever did it, We
and
saw
people
that.
think, that we've had people, if you have, Tim Hudson's a perfect example. Before he was really educated. Now, I mean, Tim Hudson's the gentleman who owns the Pico building.
Mm-hmm.
At first, he had that same approach. I want to do it this way, and now he's all about, send off the sample and get it analyzed because I want to protect my building because he gets it. But yeah, he wanted to do that on his building, and it was like, why is the city being so difficult or requiring this? We actually have to send it off to a lab and get it analyzed because you have to. They actually do an analysis of the original mortar and they give you the recipe. They'll say, this much lime, this much, all of that, and they'll give you the mortar mix and that you have it for the future of your building. Now you have it.
Did he repoint?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He repointed and the shading didn't match and he actually sat out there every day with a paintbrush like this and hand glazed all the mortar joints with the glazing he
Wow.
got from the manufacturer.
Did he move in already and everything?
Yeah, he's
Is it
in
offices? Is that what it is?
his office, but
Yeah.
he's got a demo permit on one side of the downstairs. Because he and I have been talking a lot, and I keep encouraging him, open it up to original. Because it was all divided,
Yeah.
and there's paneled
And
walls,
paneling and yeah.
So he's got a demo permit to open it up and to try to see where the
That's
original wall
awesome.
was. And then he wants to rent it out. So he's hoping to do like a tenant build out, but he wants to clear that first because if somebody walks in the way it is now, they can't see the vision.
Oh God, no.
And the other thing
Little
is,
rooms everywhere.
They put drop ceilings, so they
Like a
covered
building.
this
Oh.
arch part of the window, so it doesn't let a lot of light in. So it's real dark in there. So he's trying to open that up. So, but yeah, he's working on it. It's like a side project though. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, it's been fun with him to educate him about all this stuff because now he really embraces it with the building. And
Right.
if you remember when he came before HPB several years ago, it was, I want to pull off every stick of wood off my building and
The
put
windows.
plastic and vinyl, and he doesn't think like that anymore. So, but and that's the thing as board members, when people are upset about certain things in the regulations, if you know these things and you can explain them, because we're not trying to be difficult, we're actually looking out for the best interest of the building, which is the best interest of the property owner and the money that they're spending on their building. And I just have a couple of links here. And I know Anna made fun of me one day because I carried around pieces of siding in my
Yeah.
purse. But I had it because I was teaching a class and I was showing them, if you take original, people want to rip out the historic siding and put new siding because their contractor said, oh, it's going to be too expensive to strip paint. So they want to go the cheaper route. So I can't even tell you how many requests I get where I want to pull this whole wall off. It's old wood. It's junk. It's, we want it gone. We want new wood. Everything's going to be new. It's going to be, perfectly primed and painted. And the answer is no. We just don't allow it. And the reason why is because the newer growth wood, it's from tree farms. It's monoculture. They grow them for like 10, 15 years before they harvest them. You could put your finger on it, your nail. It's going to, you do woodworking, Ian, you'll make an indent with your finger. But if you're using the older growth stuff, which like this,
It's a lot more dense.
yeah, the growth rings, it's tightly packed. If you looked at this under a magnifying glass, the end grain of wood, it looks like a bunch of straws packed together. And that's why, especially on the ends, it's so susceptible to sucking in moisture. If you get on the ends of your porch boards, you always want to back prime your wood, and especially in areas like that, it makes more sense to try to get salvaged materials.
Yeah.
Whereas, maybe something on the interior, or you can go with the new wood there, but anything that's exposed, you want to go with the older because it is so much stronger.
Yeah.
And anybody who works with this stuff knows a lot of times you can't hammer a nail in it. You have to pre-drill. So it's really great stuff, and I think it's such a shame when you see where people rip it out of their house because their contractor didn't want to sand it, where they could save a couple of bucks.
That happened, when we were replacing a few of Mike didn't have time to do it, so he hired someone who, I don't know, on Nextdoor was recommended, and that's what he wanted to do. And Mike went over there and he said, the guy was like, well, I'm just going to replace it. And Mike was like, no, cut it out.
No.
You know, it's
Because they don't
ridiculous.
get it.
Ridiculous.
This is just an example of what I was talking about before.
Yeah.
Just some other issues. You
I think
see
we
this
saw
more
some of that when we had that lecture. Remember that guy that came from the Casa Feliz guy?
Right,
Or
right.
no, it wasn't him. It was another one. Remember he talked about brick and
Right.
all that deterioration and look at that.
Yeah, that's
Moss.
just water intrusion. So see how it's like growing mold.
Moss, yeah.
A lot of times when you see the white on the brick, that's from salts leaching out from the brick. So there's issues a lot of times that will come from the mortar joints, or that comes from water intrusion from the backside. The other thing to remember about these buildings is when they were built, they didn't have AC. So what happens when you start sealing everything up, you know, foam and
Condensation.
then AC, and it changes what's going on. And we have a building downtown that used to have a photography studio, and the north wall, you know, it was having some issues where it kept like beating water on the inside of the wall because of the, you know, them changing the AC. It's like sometimes once you get to this point, and I was the people over at St. James AME Church in Georgetown, I keep underscoring that to them, is when you get to the point where now you've added AC to your building, you can't go and seal things up and then add AC and then say, okay, we're not going to use the building for 3 months, so we're just going to shut everything down. Like, you need to, if you're going to do, you got to keep it at a consistent temperature, because those spikes are, it's not good for the building. You want to keep things pretty neutral if you're in a situation where it's not really breathing anymore. With them, they've had things that were added over time, like carpet. They've had water intrusion from roof leaks, so their plaster is actually separating. I mean, they come in and they'll be gone for 2 weeks, and there'll be another section of the ceiling that's come down. But that's all from water intrusion. And again, building envelope. And here's some more. You can see that right here. Another thing to think about in a preservation plan as you're looking at like the resources citywide is adaptive use, and that really becomes important in buildings that are what we call white elephants. And do you all know what I mean by that term? It's like a white elephant building is a building that just sits there because it's like, oh my gosh, what do we do with this huge historic building? We don't know what to do with it. So adaptive use is basically thinking outside the box. I have a feeling we might be faced with that in two pretty large buildings here soon. One is the Student Museum, and the other is First Presbyterian Church.
Yeah.
I don't see those going to a school use or going to a church use. So those are two examples right there of what would be adaptive use projects. So adaptive use is the process of reusing an old site or a building for a purpose other than which it was built or designed for. And it is a very important concept in preservation. As technology advances and buildings become outdated, it's important to think outside the box in order for the buildings to survive. And it's important in preventing demolition, because if you can't reuse these buildings and they just sit there, then they're a target, obviously. And I just wanted to run by this concept of embodied energy to you, because we deal with it a lot in demolition. Is embodied energy is all the energy that goes into constructing a building. So historic buildings, or any built building for that matter, anything in the built environment has embodied energy. So, you know, it was the gas for the trucks that took the building materials. It was the, you know, the energy involved in cutting the trees down. I mean, all of this has embodied energy. And so as people who are energy conscious, when they start thinking about, you know, I want to tear this down, I want to tear that, that's energy. Now you're just getting rid of it and carting it off to a landfill. This especially becomes important in things like, you know, an adaptive use project would be a good example. Like if they're trying to redo it and get like a LEED certification, because they get credits and energy credits. So it's important to know that concept, because there are certain, you know, tax credits and different things that can appeal to an investor if they understand these different concepts. So I have some examples of adaptive use. This one's kind of neat. It's called Church Brew Works. It's in Pittsburgh.
Have you all ever seen this?
No,
I've been to Pittsburgh many times, but never.
it a brewery?
I've never been down there.
It's a
Yeah.
brewery. Yeah,
must have been a Catholic church.
it's a brewery.
It should have been a winery if it was a Catholic church.
It's the priests are running it.
But this is where they have all their tanks or whatever.
You know, in New York, I'm trying to remember the name of the pizzeria, but it is an old church. Have you been to it? Where the ceilings are all painted, and it's a pizza
I think
place.
First Presbyterian would be an awesome restaurant.
But it
That's what I
could
think.
wind up being residential, you know.
Yep.
There's a church in New York when I was
It has
growing
top.
up. It was a nightclub called the Limelight. So yeah, that was a pretty crazy club. Yeah, like this was an old factory, and now it's kind of like a mall area restaurant.
Ghirardelli
shops.
chocolates.
And in Boston, where Mike's from, when we went to visit a couple years ago, not a couple years ago, probably in '07, some of the big factories that just people abandoned, like you were talking about, were getting redone into condos, and very expensive condos.
This is one of my favorite projects because I grew up in Brooklyn, and when I was younger, if we went to this area, this is like the area that was so seedy and all the closed down factories, and there was nothing going over there, and it's right by the Brooklyn Bridge. So you had this beautiful with the Brooklyn Bridge there, but it was so scary that you were being daring in high school if you went over there and drove through there, because the only thing that was over there was like
Drugs.
drug dealers and
Yeah.
prostitutes, and I mean it was just like out there. And I guess like in the 90s time frame, the planners kind of started looking at this area like loft conversions and converting the warehouses to residential, and then they branded the neighborhood. They called it Dumbo, and what that stood for is down under the Manhattan Bridge overpass. So it's by the Brooklyn and Manhattan Bridge, and so they branded the neighborhood. They started putting marketing to it. People started coming in and doing these conversions, and now this is like one of the best neighborhoods in Brooklyn right now. And this is also near Brooklyn Bridge Park, so it spurred all of this redevelopment, because when you're walking through this area and you kind of turn a corner, Lower Manhattan's right there. I mean, this is directly across from the Trade Center, and that beautiful view of the skyline is right there. And this is just, it was all derelict. So this whole neighborhood is like adaptive use because it was a factory neighborhood, and now it's residential, it's restaurants. I mean, this is the neighborhood where all the people, the young families. It's just very family friendly. It's kind of funny how that's changed, but that's a large scale, on a neighborhood scale, of adaptive use.
Like the High Line is adapted use.
Yes, that's one of my favorite adaptive use projects.
Yeah.
It's
What is
Clever.
it?
High Line. It's an
Over
old
here?
railroad
Oh.
elevated train tracks, and they turn into a linear park.
Huh.
It's
Yeah,
fantastic.
it was a
Hell,
1.5 mile elevated train through the meatpacking district in New York, and it was a commercial train. It wasn't a passenger train that just serviced the meatpacking district. But as the meatpacking district started changing, again, adaptive use, these factories and all started being converted into residential, and the area became trendy. Then people kind of considered this elevated train as an eyesore. It's vacant, it's abandoned. So the city of New York was actually going to tear it down. But these people who lived in the neighborhood, who it had kind of started seeding and creating its own environment and growing like wildflowers and weeds and but it was a little bit of green space. So these people who lived in the neighborhood just started this campaign of Save the High Line and put pressure on. And they wound up, because all this trendy stuff that was coming, a lot of the design houses located in the packing district. And so they got them on board of Save the High Line, and, these high money backers for the project, and the city of New York did it. And it has, like, this is now being copied, like they did it in Singapore, they're doing it in France, like it's being copied all over the place, but it's such an awesome project.
Big success.
Yeah, I've been there like 3 times now. I went there when it was under construction. I went there when they completed the first phase, and then recently I was there because now they're actually thinking about building an elevated park to connect to. So, they saved this historic elevated train because it's really cool. It's, wrought iron, and some of the ironwork is really neat. They kept the track. So there's still telltale signs that it was a train, but it is just so cool. I mean, I'll have to show you all pictures of
What
that.
is happening with the schoolhouse?
They have an RFQ right now.
You know, the school.
They have an RFQ out right now that closes in March. So what they're doing is they're soliciting input from interested parties about what they might see there. So depending on what the proposals they get, they either, you know, if they got a proposal for school, maybe they would just gift the building. If they got a proposal for residential, I think they would wind up selling the building. So it just really depends on what they get. So that's in March, it's going to close.
Speaking of adapted use, I don't know if you saw in today's paper, Pittsburgh, they're adapting use of the old Macy's department store.
What are they turning it into?
Well, hotel, condos, but they're keeping all the original architecture, inside and out, as best they can, but it's going to look great.
That's cool.
And it's right in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
There's one in Boston, which I was telling the guys who are buying the jail. It was a huge old jail in Boston, and they turned it into a hotel, a multi-million-dollar project, but they turned it into a hotel. And one area where the cells were, they turned it into a restaurant. The name of the restaurant is Clink.
Oh, nice.
Love it.
It's such a cool project. They won all these National Trust Awards and, you know,
Nice.
National Preservation Awards.
Wow.
But that was a cool adaptive use because you know which one is hard? Mental institutions, because they have a stigma with them.
Yeah.
But some of these buildings that you know, in the
Oh,
Northeast
God.
are just
Yeah, like
phenomenal. But
Same
who wants to
asylums.
come in?
Did you ever see Sunnyland in Orlando?
No.
Did you guys ever see that? They tore it down in, like the mid-90s, but it was an old insane asylum.
Oh, wow.
oh, was it really?
Orlando near, I don't know
So
exactly where it was.
if you all don't have any questions about what we went over, real quick, I'm going to pass out the maps, and I'll just give Hank a little bit of an explanation. But I want those to have you take them with you so you have them as you're driving around and thinking, I want to see what areas we want to concentrate on first. And I know we talked about that before when I was working on the grant. But since we're revisiting everything now, I just wanted to freshen your mind again.
Also, quick, Christine.
So we're going to go
Oh, I'm
ahead and
sorry.
close out the training. If that's
Oh,
is your
yeah.
question about the training?
No.
Okay. So we're going to go ahead and close out the training.